August 24th, 1814. British troops march into Washington with torches in hand. By morning, the president's house will be a smoking ruin. But this isn't just a story about one night of flames. This is about what that fire exposed. Before we dive into the story, imagine watching your country's most powerful symbol burn to the ground. That moment of destruction reveals truths people spend centuries trying to hide. If you're ready to uncover the real story behind America's most famous address, click the like button and subscribe to the channel. I always check the comments to see where you're all watching from. Drop your country and the time right now. Now let's continue with the story. The smoke rising from the president's house that August night carried with it more than just the smell of burning wood and fabric. It carried secrets. Admiral George Cockburn stood in the abandoned dining room, a glass of wine still on the table, the food barely cold. President Madison had fled hours earlier. Dolly Madison grabbed what she could, including that famous portrait of Washington. Everything else? Fuel for the fire. The British soldiers weren't vandals acting on impulse. This was calculated. They piled furniture in the center of each room. They broke windows to create draft. They understood how fire spreads, how buildings collapse, how symbols die. When they lit the torches, they were burning more than timber and plaster. They were burning the idea that this young republic could stand against empire. But here's what that fire revealed, what the flames stripped bare. The building they were destroying had never been finished in the first place. 18 years after construction began, rooms still lacked plaster. Staircases led nowhere. The grand vision that architect James Hoban had drawn up in 1792 remained half realized, half imagined. The British were burning a work in progress masquerading as a completed symbol of power. The sandstone walls quarried from Aquia Creek in Virginia had always been porous, soft, the kind of stone that looks impressive but absorbs water, weakens with time, cracks under pressure. Now, blackened by fire, those walls told a different story than the one Americans wanted to tell about their democracy. They showed fragility, they showed improvisation, they showed a nation still figuring out what it wanted to be. When dawn broke on August 25th, the damage was complete. The interior was gone. The roof had collapsed. The walls stood scorched and hollow, like a skeleton stripped of flesh. Neighbors emerged from hiding to see what remained of their young nation's house. What they saw was both ending and beginning. The fire had destroyed the building, yes, but it had also exposed the truth about what that building had always been, a work in progress built on compromises, constructed by hands that would never hold power, meant to project strength it didn't quite possess. The real story of the White House begins here, in these ashes. Everything that came before led to this moment. Everything that comes after will be shaped by it. To understand why the president's house burned so easily, you need to go back 24 years earlier, to a room where three men made a deal that would determine where American power would live. In 1790, a famous compromise dinner between Thomas Jefferson, Alexander Hamilton, and James Madison took place in New York City, the meeting that helped resolve the debt-capital compromise that led to establishing the federal capital. The young nation is fracturing before it can properly form. Hamilton needs his financial plan approved. The southern states need the capital moved south. What happens at this dinner table will create Washington, but it will also create something nobody fully anticipated, a city built from nothing, in a location nobody wanted, housing a government nobody quite trusted yet. The Residence Act passed later that year, and George Washington selected the site along the Potomac River for the federal district. He selects a 10-mile square of marsh and farmland straddling Maryland and Virginia. It's strategic, sitting between north and south. It's also miserable, humid, mosquito-infested, the kind of place people avoid, not the kind they build capitals in. But Washington has a vision, and he has a surveyor named Andrew Ellicott to make it real. Major Pierre-Charles L'Enfant arrives with grand plans for a city of monuments and boulevards. He imagines Paris on the Potomac. The reality is harder. L'Enfant clashes with everyone, refuses to compromise, gets fired within a year. What remains are his ambitious maps and a massive task, actually building something in this swamp. The President's House competition launches in 1792. 9 designs come in, most are mediocre. Then James Hoban submits his proposal. He's an Irish immigrant trained in Dublin, and his design borrows heavily from Leinster House, the Dublin mansion of the Duke of Leinster. It's neoclassical. It's European. It's everything the commissioners want. Impressive without being royal. Substantial without being a palace. Hoban wins. $500 and the job of building America's most important house. Construction begins on October 13, 1792. Washington himself lays the cornerstone. But here's where the American ideals meet American reality. This house of democracy will be built by people who have no democracy at all. The labor force was mixed and included a substantial number of enslaved men who quarried sandstone, laid foundations, and performed the hardest physical work, often with their owners or contractors receiving payment rather than the workers themselves. Some are hired out by their enslavers, who pocket the wages. Others are owned by the commissioners overseeing construction. The records show payments to enslavers, not to the people doing the work. This isn't hidden. It's standard practice. The stone comes from Aquia Creek, 40 miles south in Virginia. It's beautiful. It's workable. It's also soft. Architects today would never choose it for a major building, but in 1792, options are limited and time is pressing. The government needs a house, and it needs one quickly. Progress is slow. The walls rise, but the money doesn't flow consistently. Congress appropriates funds in fits and starts. Workers are hired, then let go, then hired again. By 1796, the building is nowhere near finished, but time is running out. The government is supposed to move to Washington in 1800. That deadline is approaching, and the President's House is still a construction site. Washington never lives in the house he commissioned. He leaves office in 1797, returns to Mount Vernon, and dies 2 years later. The building continues without him, but slowly. The roof goes on. Interior walls go up. Plaster gets applied to some rooms, but not others. It's a race against a deadline that everybody knows they'll barely meet. John Adams will be the first to live there, but he'll move into a house that isn't ready. Jefferson will follow, and he'll have his own ideas about what this building should be. But first, they all have to live with what Hoban and his workers are creating, a structure built on compromise, constructed by coerced labor, meant to house a government still figuring out what it stands for. The foundation is literally and figuratively unstable. Everything that follows will bear that weight. The construction site at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue operates 6 days a week through the 1790s. What's happening there tells you everything about the gap between American ideals and American practice. James Hoban oversees a workforce that shifts in size depending on congressional funding. At peak construction, over 100 men work the site. Some are paid laborers, Scottish stonemasons brought over for their expertise. Some are local hirelings earning daily wages, and some are property, rented from their enslavers at $5 per month. The records are specific. In 1794, the commissioners pay Daniel Carroll of Duddington for the labor of his enslaved workers. They pay Notley Young for his. They pay others whose names appear in ledgers with clinical precision. The men doing the actual work appear only as numbers, if they appear at all. These anonymous builders quarry the sandstone at Aquia Creek. The stone is freestone, meaning it can be cut in any direction. Perfect for carving decorative elements. Terrible for long-term durability. Water seeps in. Freeze-thaw cycles crack it. But in 1794, nobody's thinking about 1844. They're thinking about finishing before the deadline. The stone arrives by boat, up the Potomac to the construction site. Enslaved laborers unload it, move it, position it. Skilled masons, mostly white, do the finish carving. This division of labor isn't accidental. It's the economic model of the early republic. Skilled work for paid craftsmen, brutal physical labor for unpaid humans. Hoban's design calls for 3 floors plus a basement. The ground floor will house service areas. The state floor above it will contain the public rooms where presidents meet dignitaries. The private quarters go on the 3rd floor. It's a hierarchy built into the architecture. Servants below, politics in the middle, family on top. But even this hierarchy has a deeper level. The actual service work, the cooking and cleaning and maintaining, will be done by people who don't appear in Hoban's architectural drawings. They're invisible in the design because they're meant to be invisible in practice. Construction is brutal work. The sandstone is heavy. The days are long. Summer in Washington means oppressive heat and humidity. Winter means frozen ground and biting wind. Men die on the job. The records occasionally note accidents, injuries, deaths. They note them the way you'd note a broken tool, regrettable, costly, requiring replacement. By 1798, the exterior walls stand complete. The roof structure is in place, but the interior remains raw. Lath and plaster work continues. Flooring gets laid in some rooms, others stay as bare joists. The question becomes unavoidable. Will this building be ready when the government arrives in 1800? Congress appropriates more money. Hoban pushes harder. The work accelerates, but corners get cut. Plaster goes up wet. Paint covers unfinished surfaces. The building starts to look complete from the outside while remaining incomplete within. It's a facade in the most literal sense. The cost keeps climbing. Initial estimates suggested $200,000. The actual expense approaches $400,000 by the time Adams moves in. In today's money, that's roughly $7 million. Not cheap, but also not extraordinary for a building of this size and importance. What's extraordinary is how much of that money goes to people who aren't doing the work. Enslavers pocket wages for labor they don't perform. Commissioners take cuts. Suppliers inflate prices. The system enriches everyone except the people actually building the house. This isn't corruption in the traditional sense, it's the designed function of the economy. By late 1799, Hoban declares the building habitable. Not finished, not complete, but habitable. President Adams is scheduled to move the government to Washington in June 1800. The house will be ready enough, it will have to be. What nobody understands yet is that ready enough will define this building for decades. It will always be incomplete, always under renovation, always becoming rather than being. The construction never really ends. It just changes form. November 1st, 1800. John Adams arrives at the president's house after a grueling journey from the temporary capital in Philadelphia. He's the first president to sleep here. He's also the last person who should be testing an unfinished building. The place is a disaster. Plaster is still wet on the walls. Only 6 rooms are actually plastered at all. The main staircase isn't finished. There's no running water system. The yard is a mud pit littered with construction debris, lumber scraps, and abandoned tools. Abigail Adams will later hang laundry in the East Room because it's the only space large enough and there's nowhere else to dry clothes. Adams writes to her the day he arrives. His letter contains one of the most famous lines about the building. I pray heaven to bestow the best of blessings on this house and all that shall hereafter inhabit it. Noble sentiment. The reality is he's praying in a cold, damp, unfinished mansion that barely functions as a residence. The heating system is a catastrophe. Fireplaces exist, but there aren't enough of them, and they don't draw properly. Smoke backs up into rooms. The presidential family freezes through that first winter. Staff scramble to make the place livable while Adams tries to govern from a building site. He occupies the house for exactly 4 months. The election of 1800 goes to Thomas Jefferson after a brutal tied electoral college vote that requires 36 ballots in the House of Representatives to resolve. Adams leaves in March 1801, bitter and defeated. He doesn't attend Jefferson's inauguration. Jefferson moves in with entirely different ideas about presidential power and presentation. Adams ran a formal household modeled on European courts. Jefferson wants to strip away that formality. He holds informal dinners. He greets foreign diplomats in slippers. He opens the house to public visitors on certain days, letting ordinary citizens walk through rooms where policy gets made. It sounds democratic. It is theater. Because while Jefferson preaches simplicity and Republican virtue, he brings his enslaved staff from Monticello to run the household. His chef, trained in French cuisine, his butler, his household servants. They're all enslaved people maintaining Jefferson's performance of democratic accessibility. The contradiction is staggering. Jefferson, the philosopher, argues for equality. Jefferson, the slaveholder, depends on inequality to function. The house becomes a stage for this hypocrisy. Visitors see a president who seems like a regular person. They don't see the apparatus of coerced labor making that performance possible. Jefferson also starts renovating immediately. He adds water closets. He builds terraces and colonnades. He wants the house to be more practical, less ostentatious. His changes reflect his politics, but also his discomfort with inherited grandeur. He's trying to make the building fit his vision of what American leadership should look like. But the fundamental structure remains Hoban's design. Jefferson can modify, and adapt, but he can't change the basic fact that this is a European-style mansion built with American contradictions. The architecture argues for hierarchy. Jefferson's modifications argue against it. The building holds both arguments simultaneously. During his 8 years in office, Jefferson continues to open the house for public receptions. Anyone can attend, supposedly. The reality is more complicated. Social class determines who actually shows up. Race determines who enters through which door. Gender determines who gets invited to dinners. The People's House has gatekeepers, even if they're less visible than in Adams's time. Meanwhile, the building continues to decay. The soft sandstone absorbs moisture. Cracks appear, paint peels, the roof leaks. Constant maintenance is required just to prevent deterioration. This pattern will continue for decades. The house always needs repair because the original construction was rushed and the materials were inadequate. When Jefferson leaves office in 1809, the building is more finished than when Adams arrived, but still incomplete. Still becoming. James Madison moves in next, bringing his wife Dolly, who will transform the house's social function, but that transformation will be cut short by fire. The building that burns in 1814 is Jefferson's modified version of Hoban's rushed construction. All those compromises, all that corner cutting, all that coerced labor will go up in smoke. What happens next will force America to rebuild its most important house, and this time, they'll have to confront what they built the first time around. August 24th, 1814. The War of 1812 has dragged into its third year, and now it's coming to Washington. British forces under General Robert Ross march toward the capital with 4,000 troops. Their target isn't military installations. It's symbolic destruction. James Madison is with American troops at Bladensburg, Maryland, 5 miles northeast of Washington. The battle there is a rout. American militia breaks and runs. Madison himself barely escapes capture. He sends word to the president's house, evacuate. Leave now. Dolly Madison receives the message early afternoon. She has maybe 3 hours before British troops arrive. What do you save when your house is about to burn? She makes choices that will define her legacy. The Gilbert Stuart portrait of George Washington comes down from the wall. It's screwed to the frame. She orders the frame broken and the canvas removed. State papers get packed, silver gets loaded into carriages, then she leaves. The house sits empty by early evening. The president's house was largely evacuated and unsecured. An uneaten meal sat in the dining room. British advance elements arrived that night, and Admiral Sir George Cockburn, a prominent figure in the raid, inspected the house before the incendiarism began. He's not a mindless destroyer. He's making a calculated statement. Cockburn and his officers sit down at the abandoned dining table. They eat the food meant for Madison. They drink his wine. They toast the Prince Regent. It's psychological warfare as much as physical invasion. Then they get to work. The destruction is methodical. Soldiers pile furniture in the center of each major room. They break windows to create airflow. They understand fire. You don't just light a match and hope. You build conditions for maximum combustion. Chairs, tables, curtains, anything flammable goes into the piles. Then comes the ignition. Multiple fires start simultaneously. The East Room, the State Dining Room, the entrance hall. Flames spread quickly through the piles, catch on wall coverings, climb to the wooden interior structures. The heat becomes intense. Glass shatters, the roof catches. British troops maintain discipline. This isn't random vandalism, it's ordered destruction of specific symbolic targets. The Capitol is burning simultaneously. The Treasury building is next. They're erasing the physical symbols of American government. By midnight, the president's house is fully engulfed. The roof collapses inward. Interior floors fall into the basement. The sandstone walls, already weakened by years of water absorption, crack from the extreme heat, but they stand. The exterior shell survives even as everything inside turns to ash. A thunderstorm rolls in overnight. Heavy rain dampens the fires but comes too late to save anything structural. When dawn breaks on August 25th, what remains is a hollowed-out shell. The walls stand blackened and scorched. The windows are empty sockets. The roof is gone. The interior is rubble. Washington residents emerge to see the damage. Some weep. Some are angry. Some are simply stunned. The young nation's house of power is a ruin. The symbolism is devastating. Britain has reached into the heart of America and destroyed what Madison's generation built. But the British don't occupy. They burn and leave. Ross marches his troops out of Washington the next day, heading for Baltimore. The campaign will end badly for them there. At Fort McHenry, American forces will hold, inspiring Francis Scott Key to write what becomes the national anthem. But in Washington, the destruction stands as accomplished fact. The question becomes immediate: rebuild or relocate? Some in Congress argue for moving the capital elsewhere. Philadelphia, Lancaster, anywhere but this burned-out swamp. Others insist on rebuilding in place. To move would be to admit defeat. To rebuild would be to defy the British destruction. The debate lasts weeks. Eventually, the rebuilders win. Washington will remain the capital. The president's house will rise again. James Hoban gets called back to reconstruct what he originally built. But this time, everyone knows the truth about those soft sandstone walls. This time, they'll need to hide the damage. That's where the white paint comes in. James Hoban stands in front of the burned shell in late 1814, assessing what can be saved. The exterior walls still stand, but they're compromised. Fire damage, water damage, structural cracks from extreme temperature changes. The sandstone that was already soft is now porous and weakened. He faces an impossible task: rebuild quickly with limited funds using damaged materials. Congress appropriates money, but not enough. The initial authorization is half what's needed. Hoban has to make it work anyway. The pressure is political as much as practical. America needs to show Britain that burning buildings doesn't break nations. The house must rise again, and it must rise soon. Work begins in spring 1815. Hoban brings back many of the same workers from the original construction. That includes enslaved laborers, rented from their enslavers, under the same arrangements as before. The fire changed nothing about who builds and who profits. The exterior walls present the biggest problem. They're structurally sound enough to keep, but they look terrible. Blackened, stained, cracked. Replacing them entirely would cost too much and take too long. Hoban needs a solution that's fast, cheap, and effective at hiding damage. The answer is paint, white lead paint, applied in thick coats over the scorched sandstone. It covers the fire damage. It seals the porous stone. It creates a uniform appearance that suggests pristine reconstruction rather than salvaged ruins. The transformation is dramatic. Blackened walls become brilliantly white. The post-fire white paint applied during the reconstruction from 1815 to 1817 popularized the name the White House, though the president's office did not adopt that heading on official stationery until October of 1901 under Theodore Roosevelt's direction. The white paint is too distinctive to ignore, but the name carries an unintended irony. It literally covers up damage, conceals the building's trauma beneath a fresh surface. The metaphor writes itself. Interior reconstruction takes longer. Everything inside burned completely. Hoban rebuilds from the basement up. New floor joists, new plaster, new woodwork. He follows the original floor plan but makes improvements based on lessons learned. Better fireplaces, improved drainage, stronger structural supports. The work stretches across 3 years. Madison never lives in the reconstructed house. He completed his presidency in temporary quarters, notably the Octagon House. James Monroe took office in March 1817 and moved into the rebuilt President's House in October 1817 as reconstruction finished that year. The delay frustrates everyone, but rushing caused problems the first time. Hoban refuses to repeat those mistakes. The plaster must cure properly. The paint must dry completely. The structure must settle. When Monroe finally occupies the house, it's actually finished in ways it never was when Adams first moved in, 18 years earlier. But finished doesn't mean permanent. The sandstone beneath the paint continues to deteriorate. Water still seeps in. The stone still cracks. The paint hides these problems temporarily, but they're still happening. The building will require constant maintenance, constant repainting, constant repair. This pattern becomes permanent. Monroe furnishes the house lavishly. He purchases French furniture, decorative objects, and artwork using congressional appropriations. The reconstructed interior becomes grander than what Jefferson stripped away. It reflects Monroe's vision of presidential dignity and also serves as a statement. America isn't just rebuilding, it's improving. The reconstruction costs approximately $500,000, more expensive than the original construction. In modern terms, roughly $9 million. Congress grumbles about the expense but pays it. The alternative, abandoning Washington entirely, would cost more in political capital than money can measure. By 1820, the work is complete. The president's house stands white and imposing, looking more finished than it ever has. Visitors see a triumph of reconstruction. What they don't see is the compromised stone beneath the paint, the enslaved labor that made it possible, the financial shortcuts that will create future problems. The building looks permanent. It's actually fragile. That tension between appearance and reality will define the house for the next century. Every president will add something, change something, repair something. The reconstruction after the fire isn't an ending. It's just another chapter in a story of constant transformation. The 19th century transforms the president's house in ways Hoban never imagined. Each administration leaves marks. Some are additions, some are removals. All reflect changing ideas about what presidential power should look like and how it should function. Andrew Jackson opens the house to 20,000 people for his inaugural reception in 1829. The crowd is so large and rowdy that Jackson escapes through a window. Furniture gets broken. Carpets get ruined. The mob empties punch bowls spiked with whiskey placed on the lawn to lure people outside. It's democracy in action, and it's a disaster. Running water arrives in 1833 under Jackson. The system pumps water from a nearby spring into basement reservoirs. It's primitive by later standards, but revolutionary at the time. Indoor plumbing follows gradually. Bathrooms appear. Water closets get installed. The house becomes modern by mid-century standards. Gas lighting was installed in the White House in 1848 during the administration of James Polk. Pipes run through the walls. Fixtures appear in major rooms. The president can now illuminate the house without fire risk. The change is practical but also symbolic. America's house adopts the latest technology as soon as it's available. But the real, story isn't technological upgrades. It's who maintains them. Throughout the century, the House staff remains predominantly black. Some are enslaved until 1862, when Congress abolishes slavery in the District of Columbia. Others are paid servants, though their wages are low and their treatment often degrading. Their invisible labor making visible grandeur possible. The Civil War brings its own changes. Abraham Lincoln governs from this house while the nation tears itself apart. He can see Confederate positions across the Potomac from upstairs windows. Union troops camp on the grounds. The house becomes a military headquarters as much as a residence. Lincoln's assassination in 1865 happens at Ford's Theater, but his body lies in state in the East Room. The same room where Abigail Adams hung laundry now holds the coffin of the president who ended slavery. The transformation of the space mirrors the transformation of the nation. After the war, the house continues to evolve. Central heating arrives under Ulysses Grant. An elevator gets installed in 1881 for James Garfield, who is confined to bed after being shot. Technology keeps advancing. The building keeps adapting. But adaptation has limits. By the 1880s, the house is bursting. Presidents and their families live and work in the same cramped quarters. Staff sleep in the attic. Public receptions happen in the same rooms where children do homework. The building wasn't designed for modern presidential operations, and the strain shows. Proposals emerge for expansion. Some suggest building wings. Others want to tear it down and start over. Chester Arthur actually begins redecorating in 1882, removing 24 wagon loads of old furniture and replacing it with Tiffany glass screens and elaborate Victorian decoration. It's gorgeous and completely impractical. The Gilded Age stuffs the house with excess. Each president tries to make it grander, more impressive, more befitting a growing world power. But grandeur doesn't solve the fundamental space problem. The building is too small for its purpose. The layout is outdated. The structure is still that same soft sandstone covered in layers of paint. By 1900, the house is a century old and showing its age. Electric lights have replaced gas. Telephones connect to the outside world. But the basic floor plan remains Hoban's design from 1792. Presidents still live above their offices. Staff still navigate impossible working conditions. The building still requires constant maintenance. What nobody realizes yet is that the structure itself is failing. Not just outdated, actually failing. The weight of a century is too much for those rushed foundations and soft stone walls. The next major transformation won't be about technology or decoration. It will be about survival. Theodore Roosevelt is coming, and he'll force changes that finally match the building's function to its form. But even his dramatic renovations won't solve the deepest problem. That crisis waits another 50 years when a piano will break through a floor and reveal that the House of American Power is held together by hope and habit. Theodore Roosevelt moves into the president's house in September 1901 after William McKinley's assassination. He arrives with 6 children, a wife, and an absolute certainty that this building doesn't work. The first family lives upstairs. The offices are downstairs. The two functions collide constantly. Something has to change. Roosevelt brings in the architectural firm McKim, Mead, and White. Charles McKim is one of America's premier architects, designer of Pennsylvania Station and the Boston Public Library. His assignment? Make this house function like the headquarters of a modern world power while preserving its historical character. It's a massive brief. The renovation begins in June 1902. The family moves out to a temporary residence. Workers gut the interior. What they find isn't encouraging. The structure is weaker than anyone suspected. Beams are rotting. Foundations are settling unevenly. The building has survived a century through constant patching rather than solid construction. McKim's solution is radical. He excavates the entire basement, lowering the floor and creating usable space. He builds the West Wing as a separate structure for executive offices, connected by a colonnade. This gets the working government out of the family's living space. It's the single most important functional change in the building's history. The West Wing is temporary construction, meant to be replaced eventually with something grander, but temporary becomes permanent. Presidents discover they like having offices separate from residence. The West Wing expands over the next 2 decades, eventually housing the Oval Office and the entire executive staff. Inside the main house, McKim strips away Victorian excess. Out goes Arthur's Tiffany glass. Out go layers of wallpaper and dark wood paneling. McKim wants neoclassical simplicity, a return to what he imagines the house looked like under Jefferson. He's creating a historical fiction, but it's an appealing one. The state dining room gets enlarged. The East Room receives a new ceiling. Corridors get widened. Electric wiring gets properly installed rather than tacked onto existing walls. The house becomes functional in ways it never was before. Technology and design finally match. McKim also gives the building its official name. He convinces Roosevelt to adopt the White House formally. Before this, official correspondence uses Executive Mansion or President's House. After 1902, it's the White House. The informal name becomes the identity. The renovation cost nearly $600,000, roughly $18 million in today's money. Congress approves it because Roosevelt makes the case that America needs a presidential residence, worthy of its growing global status. The nation that just acquired territories in the Spanish-American War can't have its president working from cramped quarters in a deteriorating mansion. The work finishes in November 1902, just 5 months after it began. Speed is possible because McKim isn't rebuilding foundations or replacing walls. He's reorganizing interior space and adding the West Wing. The deep structural problems get addressed minimally. That will prove to be a costly oversight. Roosevelt moves back in and immediately uses the renovated space for maximum political effect. The House becomes a stage for progressive politics. Roosevelt hosts African-American educator Booker T. Washington for dinner, scandalizing much of white America. He mediates the coal strike. He pushes antitrust legislation. The House is no longer just a residence, it's a platform. The East Wing colonnade gets added in 1902 as well, connecting to existing service buildings. It provides space for social functions and additional staff. The building now has 3 connected sections: the original residence in the center, working offices in the West Wing, social operations in the East Wing. The layout makes sense for the first time. But McKim's renovation, comprehensive as it seems, is cosmetic compared to what's coming. The foundations he didn't replace continue to settle. The walls he didn't rebuild continue to weaken. The structure he preserved will fail catastrophically within 50 years. Roosevelt leaves office in 1909 believing he's solved the White House problem. He hasn't. He's bought time. The real reckoning is still approaching, and when it comes, it will require dismantling everything McKim preserved. February 1948. Harry Truman is hosting a reception in the Blue Room when the chandelier starts swaying. Not from wind, from structural movement. The floor is shifting beneath their feet. Truman notices but says nothing publicly. He's been hearing alarming sounds for months. Creaking, groaning. The house is talking, and it's saying something terrible. A few days later, Truman's piano, a Mason and Hamlin grand that weighs 700 pounds, breaks through the floor of his study. The leg punches into the family dining room below. Engineers arrive immediately. What they find is catastrophic. The White House is structurally unsound. The walls are the only thing holding it up, and they're stressed beyond capacity. The interior wooden beams installed in the 1790s and replaced after the fire in 1814 are rotted, weakened, and failing. The building could collapse at any moment. A major reception with hundreds of people could trigger disaster. The Commission on Renovation of the Executive Mansion examines every inch. Their report is damning. The floors are held up by hope. The ceilings are sagging under their own weight. The grand staircase is pulling away from the walls. In engineering terms, the house is a death trap. Two options exist: tear it down completely and build new, or preserve the exterior walls and rebuild everything inside. The historical preservation argument wins. Those sandstone walls, painted white to cover fire damage in 1814, will stay. Everything else goes. Work begins in December 1949. The Truman family moves across the street to Blair House. They'll live there for nearly 4 years while their house gets dismantled and reconstructed. What happens next is one of the most remarkable renovation projects in American history. Workers strip the interior to bare walls. Every floor, every partition, every beam, all of it comes out. The White House becomes a hollow shell with only the exterior walls remaining. Photographs from this period show the building as a skeleton, exposed and vulnerable. Then comes the steel. A complete steel frame gets erected inside the preserved walls. Modern structural engineering replaces 18th century timber construction. The new frame supports everything independently. The walls become decorative rather than load-bearing. It's a building within a building. Each room gets documented before demolition. Architects photograph, measure, and catalog every detail. Historic elements get carefully removed, stored, and later reinstalled. Mantels, moldings, decorative plasterwork. The goal is to make the reconstructed interior look identical to what existed before, even though the underlying structure is completely new. The project cost $5.7 million, roughly 70 million in today's money. It's expensive, but the alternative is losing the building entirely. Congress appropriates the funds with minimal debate. Nobody wants to be responsible for the White House collapsing. Modern systems get integrated during reconstruction. New plumbing, new electrical, air conditioning throughout, a bomb shelter in the basement. The house becomes a 20th century building wearing an 18th century costume. The deception is intentional and complete. Workers discover artifacts during demolition, fragments from the 1814 fire, tools left by earlier builders, evidence of previous renovations. The archaeology of the building reveals its layered history of construction, destruction, and reconstruction. The work takes longer than expected. Complications arise. The steel frame proves harder to fit inside the existing walls than engineers anticipated. Weather delays construction, labor disputes slow progress. The Truman family watches from Blair House as their residence undergoes transformation. Finally, in March 1952, the work finishes. The Trumans move back into a house that looks exactly like the one they left, but shares almost nothing with it structurally. The floors are solid, the ceilings don't sag, the grand staircase is anchored properly. It's safe for the first time in decades, maybe for the first time ever. What Truman and his engineers accomplished is remarkable. They saved the White House by replacing almost everything about it while preserving the appearance of historical continuity. The building Americans see today is largely a 1950 construction masquerading as an 1800 original. The soft sandstone walls still stand, still painted white, still concealing their compromised condition beneath fresh coats. But now they're supported by steel rather than supporting anything themselves. The lie becomes literal structure. The White House today receives approximately 1.5 million visitors annually who tour the public rooms. Another 4.5 million visit the grounds for events or simply to see the building from outside. They're looking at America's most recognizable symbol. What they're actually seeing is a construction palimpsest, layers of history written over each other until the original is almost invisible. The exterior walls they photograph are Aquia Creek sandstone quarried in 1792, fire-damaged in 1814, painted white to hide the scars, and maintained through countless renovations. The paint isn't original. The walls beneath it are compromised. But the image endures because the image is what matters. Inside, tourists walk on floors installed in 1950. They admire mantels from 1817. They stand in rooms whose dimensions match the original but whose structure is entirely modern. It's historical theater, carefully staged to feel authentic while being fundamentally reconstructed. The West Wing, added as a working office wing under Theodore Roosevelt in 1902, was later expanded and remodeled. A major enlargement and reconfiguration occurred in 1934 under Franklin Roosevelt. The Oval Office, perhaps the most iconic room in American government, didn't exist in the original design. It's an invention of the 20th century placed in a building from the 18th. Every president continues to modify something. Richard Nixon adds a bowling alley. Jimmy Carter installs solar panels that Ronald Reagan removes. Barack Obama updates technology infrastructure. The building never stops changing because presidential needs never stop evolving. The staff required to maintain this symbol numbers in the hundreds. Curators, groundskeepers, engineers, security personnel. Most are invisible to tourists, just as the enslaved workers who built the original structure were invisible to the presidents who lived there. The labor that makes grandeur possible remains hidden. What tourists don't see is the constant battle against decay. The sandstone still absorbs moisture, paint still peels, systems still fail. Preservation is active work performed daily, costing millions annually. The building survives because people choose to make it survive, not because it's inherently permanent. The symbolism has evolved over 2 centuries. It started as a statement that America could build something worthy of European comparison. It became a target for British forces trying to break American resolve. It transformed into a stage for presidential power. Now it's primarily an image, reproduced endlessly, recognized globally, representing democracy itself. But whose democracy? The enslaved laborers who built it never voted. The servants who maintained it through the 19th century had no political power. Women couldn't tour it on equal terms with men until the 20th century. African Americans were segregated in its public spaces well into the 1960s. The People's House has always been more selective about its people than the name suggests. Today's White House sits on land that was once tobacco farms worked by enslaved people. It's built with stone quarried by enslaved people. It was maintained for decades by enslaved and then poorly paid black staff. That history doesn't appear on the tour. The narrative presented to visitors emphasizes presidents and architecture, not the human cost of either. The building endures because Americans need it to endure. It provides continuity in a system designed for change. Every 4 or 8 years, power transfers, but the house remains. That permanence is reassuring even when it's false. The building has been burned, gutted, and reconstructed, but the exterior suggests unbroken tradition. Stand outside the fence on Pennsylvania Avenue and you see what millions see: a white mansion, elegant and imposing, symbol of American power and democracy. What you don't see is everything that made it possible. The compromised stone, the coerced labor, the constant reconstruction, the steel frame hidden inside walls that pretend to be load-bearing. The White House is America's most successful illusion. Not because it's fake, but because it's real in ways that contradict its appearance. It's a building that survived by being willing to change while maintaining the fiction that nothing fundamental ever changed. That might be the most perfectly American thing about it. If this story changed how you see this building, click the like button and subscribe to the channel. The real histories behind our most famous symbols deserve to be told, and there are dozens more waiting. Join us for the next one.